Afternoon, folks. This is just a short, it's just to give you an insight into restraint of trade. Okay, now I'm taking this from Thomson Reuters Practical Law, and it says restraint of trade. The principle that an individual should be free to follow his trade and use his skills without undue interference. So that's the principle in relation to trade. Okay, so this is how our right to free exchange, trade and barter operates. Now, it says the principle, so the principle, i.e. that you are free to follow your trade and use your skills without undue interference, renders a contractual term purporting to restrict an individual's freedom to work for others or carry out his trade or business void, unless it is designated to protect legitimate business interests and no wider than reasonably necessary. So if we break that down somewhat, what it's basically... Now, it's basically saying that the principle is that you are free to follow your trade and use your skills without undue interference, okay? And that the principle renders any contractual term purporting to restrict, so any contract that you have that is moving to restrict your individual freedom to work, either for yourself or others, is void. Do you understand that? So this is down to employment contracts that you might have where, let's say for instance, it says in there that you're not allowed to do any business for anybody else. What we used to call in building trade foreigners. That under the principle that you're free to follow trade, then any contractual obligation which is classed as a restrictive covenant is void. If you've jumped onto the law, COVID schemes, i.e. furlough, etc., they're then claiming that because you've entered into that contract, you are then restricted to trade. And it's in the contract, okay? And everybody, even myself, have gone, well, okay, yeah, if you're in the contract, you have to not trade, cease trading. But this is pretty clear. And again, it's Thomson Reuters Practical Law that because of the principle that you're free to follow your trade and use your skills without undue interference, that any principle in a contract that purports to restrict an individual's freedom to work for others or for yourself is void. Okay? But the caveat is unless it is designed to protect legitimate business interests and no wider than reasonably necessary. Well, what is it they're claiming that they're protecting? Because it's got nothing to do with your business or trade. They're claiming that these restrictive covenants that they've got you into with the grant schemes, etc., it is not designed to protect legitimate business. They're saying that it's designed to prevent a pandemic spreading. Now, that's not a legitimate business interest unless you are an organisation that wants to limit everybody else's trade in order they can monopolise trade, i.e. you've got the big boys, the big corporate boys, the supermarkets, you've got the McDonald's, you've got KFC, you've got all these big corporate boys, the Costa. These are the big boys. And basically, these guys have got license to continue to trade throughout this lockdown. And we all know this, okay? They've been given the right to trade, but yet those principles on which they're operating to trade, which is the screens up, that they're wearing masks, not touching, etc., etc., social distancing, there is no reason that those protocols can't be given to all trade that exists as it is today. Okay, so in essence then, the claim of the government is that they are protecting or creating or protecting their right to form monopoly by removing your trade, your right to trade, in the hope that in this period that you've stopped trading that your business is going to die, in order to protect what they're claiming then as legitimate business only. And that's the big boys who have taken all the money in these handouts while you're being given piffle, 3,000 here, 2,000 there. These big boys are getting millions and millions and millions. And while all these private businesses are closed, the supermarkets and the other outlets that are dancing to this corporate tune are scooping up, almost doubling their trade because you're not trading. So in essence then, what the government are claiming is that they are protecting what they class as a legitimate business interest, which equates basically to their own monopoly. Okay? Do you understand that? You might want to rewind this and listen to it again, absorb what's being said there, because it's very plain that the legitimate business interests that they're claiming to protect are their own monopoly, or their means in advancing of their monopolies. Okay. Same with the banking system. The banking system are being removed from the high streets and moved into a credit system controlled by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve in turn is controlled by the Bank of England. So back in 1931, remember, this is when the bankruptcy declarations were actually put out. The Gold Standard Amendment Act removed all liabilities off the governors of the Bank of England. So they removed the currency off gold backing standard to issue fiat, which is promissory notes, which is debt. That's what's created the debt, the promissory note system, the fiat system. So in 1931, they gave themselves, the governors of the Bank of England, removed all liability from them, which pans down to the Federal Reserve. So can you see how it's, whichever way you apply this restraint of trade, the actual entities that are actually benefiting are ultimately the central banks. So the central banks are pushing this out on you, restricting your trade, and then claiming falsely, because as it said, any restrictive covenant is void unless it's designed to protect legitimate business interests. But the only business interests that are being protected are ultimately central banks, who have no liability for what they're doing. That might take a little bit for you to sink in there. But this is a precedent, an existing body of administration law that very plain. The principle is that all individuals are free to follow his trade and use his skills without undue interference. Now, an individual, if we go to Black's 9th, edition, which is the Bible for legalese, says an individual existing as an indivisible entity. So that's what an individual is classed as, an indivisible entity of or relating to a single person or thing as opposed to a group. So even on person, according to Black's 9th edition, as an individual, as a person, still you cannot be restricted from plying your trade. Okay? Very important, people. Absorb it. Understand it. Because there is the law, the administration law, the protocol governing restraint of trade. Okay, and it's classed as a restrictive covenant. And your employment contracts are full of this stuff. Full of it. But according to this, it can't be enforced in a court, even on person. Okay? So I'll say with that, till the next time.